Hello, everybody. Nice to have you, Ella and Uma, in this private setting. We can have a very confidential talk, don't worry about it. Great to have everybody with us today. We're going to be talking a lot about what we should do about food, which is kind of important in the world. Not only food scarcity, climate change, the difficulty with the ethical questions of food, new production methods, all that kind of stuff, and we have great experts with us today. Let me know about your relationship to food. So there's so many different ways to have a relationship with food. Sometimes some people use Soylent or something or Ambronite, of course, which is much better. Just to grab nutrition, or some people really make food a lifestyle. Tell me a bit about your relationship.
Cool. It's a nice. Hi everyone. It's a nice way to begin. Instead of talking about ourselves, I'm a huge foodie. Live in San Francisco right now, so there's a lot of Soylent talk. I grew up in Poland, originally have been foraging mushrooms with my family, grew up as a meat eater actually, went vegetarian and then vegan not so long ago for different considerations, but I pretty much cook every day, have a sweet spot for like small family farms and a very traditional way of deriving food, but also as a person involved in technology. I think we have a responsibility to move to a more sustainable system, no matter how idealistic view we have of some processes. So I try to mix those things.
What about Uma? What's your foodie?
Well, I think growing up, I grew up in India, and the relationship of food, I think, starts very early in your life. And it was always around family and eating with my mom and dad and my sister, and then going to school and eating with friends on lunch, and it was very personal, and it still is, because I think the relationship with food starts really early in life. And after I became a cardiologist, I also started thinking about it from a nutritional perspective and say, okay, really, what is it? Is it really good for us? And starting to look at the long-term effects that accumulate over your life, and start realizing that the food industry has not been innovated in centuries. And it's so relatable. We eat every single day, and for some reason, we kind of take it for granted that everything that's on the plate is terrific, natural, and it's exactly the opposite in my view, because everything is changing.
Yeah.
And every century, every decade, people are only living longer. Longevity is increasing. So I think the relationship to food is really important to look at, and part of the reason I started the company is really to shed light on what needs to be done with the food industry.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a bit about food production. Besides, what do you see as some like solving agents for? I mean, it's we all know how unsustainable the land use is that we're actually growing meat on, not even our own food. What do you see in that area? What's going to be the new or the breakthroughs that are going to help us?
Well, so I think Uma would be great to talk about, like, specifically animal agriculture and what can be done. We should not spend too much time talking about the problems. We're all aware of them, but I think there's a lot of I think there's an interesting perspective on food waste, because people talk a lot about, we should not be wasting food, there should be food redistribution, how, this and this percentage, often above 50% of food and vegetables and produce gets wasted. But when you think of how much how much kind of plant-based food is fed to animals before they get consumed, then, it's like eating for beef, for example, it's 24 calories for 1 calorie of plant input per 1 calorie of beef.
So to get 1 calorie, you have to put in 24 calories.
Yeah,
okay.
And that even doesn't touch water use and land use. So you're essentially eating an apple, and every single time you eat that apple, you're throwing away 24 other apples, and also your shower is running all day. So
that's times 1.something billion cattle worldwide.
I think there are many things we could talk about. I think probably Uma has the most interesting perspective on kind of where technology comes in.
So tell us what's happening in the lab. What actually happens, and what do you put in? How do you grow a piece of meat?
Okay, so Memphis Meets is a company that was started to really grow delicious meats that are really better for us, the planet, and the animals. And it is real meat, so it's not made from plant analogs or pea proteins, but we take cells from very high quality meat animals. So for example, you have the highest quality beef cattle. We take cells from these animals, or a small amount of tissue. And in those cells, there are some that can renew themselves and become muscle tissue. So we isolate those, we put them in conditions where they get really good, clean, and rich nutrients. For example, amino acids and vitamins and minerals, oxygen, some types of sugars. And we let that grow. And the only thing those cells can grow is to become meat tissue. And once they reach a point where we feel like we can harvest them, whether they're tender or more texturized, we take them and cook into regular products like people eat, like fajitas or meatballs.
Yeah.
So that's the process.
Where do you see the price point being, let's say in 5 years, like for 100 grams of meat or for whatever unit you want to use?
So people think our company is a crazy company, and I'm here to tell the idea is not crazy anymore. It's very real. Our goal is to put products on the market within 5 years at a competitive price. So I know that when we enter the market, there will be some premium because we want to start offering it as soon as we know people will start buying it. So initially, I think they'll probably be priced close to like organic, free-range kinds of products. And then as we start scaling up, and it's all a function of funding and how quickly we can build these factories. So we think in 10 years it'll be cheaper or much more nutritious than conventional meat.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So Uma has been involved in that space for a while. We actually met 2 years ago at a symposium for cultured meat in the Netherlands, which was one of the very first events.
The burger convention.
Exactly. I mean, the burger was it was grown even before by Dr. Mark Post, but he was one of the people organizing that community early on and getting the scientific community together. And the field did not exist at that time. It was a bunch of people who, some of them work on tissue engineering for like regenerative medicine for like human users. Some other scientists, and like they just had an interest. And even this year we went again, and the field is growing, and there's way more enthusiasm, and there seems to be a good understanding, and I think this is important to say it here for anyone who's considering going to that space. There's a massive amount of opportunity for all sorts of things that will be needed for the infrastructure to mature, but it's going to happen. Like that's not a question if it's going to happen, but for me, the most exciting thing is that there is so much opportunity to transition to a better food system.
So where do you see you're putting money into food and you're putting your life into food. Where do you see the consumption going? Because so much of our products are made sort of semi-ready somewhere elsewhere, then brought to the store, and then you consume it as fast as possible. Where do you see that? And then also, like you were talking to Maija Itkonen backstage, who made this pulled oats, which are a great substitute to meat, contains 30% protein. Do you see that we're gonna eat animals in the future?
Okay, people have been eating animals for 12,000 years. And I think in the near future, yes, people will still keep eating animals. But I think what's happening really is like the democratization of food and sources of food and how food gets to the table. there is no way that we continue to produce food the way we do, especially animal agriculture, in the next 30, 50 years with 3 billion people coming on the planet. There's not enough space to actually feed these animals, grow food for these animals. And for the people that want to make it free range, organic, and go away from intense factory farming, we need 4 or 5 more planets like ours to actually feed and house that many animals. So I think we have to innovate in a way that food becomes safer, people know what they're eating. And the way we think about it is when we have these clean meat production facilities, people can go walk through it and see how the food is growing, how the meat is growing, the pork or beef or chicken is growing. Because there's no way you can walk into a slaughterhouse now. You wouldn't even be allowed to see where it's coming from until the final packaged product. So I think that's the democratization of food, and we're building the engine for it, and there'll be other companies that are really starting up in this space. So I think people will still continue to eat animal-based foods for the next several generations, but who knows after that.
Yeah, I think definitely when you look at sort of the consumer trends, I know specifically in the United States, the consumption of plant-based food is on the rise, and it's awesome. This is obviously the trend to be most excited about. It's the healthiest. It's most,
That's
kind of
in San Francisco, Whole Foods. Yes.
Yeah, but and there are kind of little pockets of right now also wealth when, especially in the United States, that's correlated. When you can eat really healthy, you have a lot of diversity, but but I think it's hard to ignore that there are many amazing plant-based replacements and new companies and there were a few attempts on designing them, and I think right now there are people who are trying to make really delicious, healthy, this is cheap, and this is how kind of people make their purchasing decisions, plant-based alternatives that are not very highly processed, that are kind of optimal for you. So that's definitely happening, and that should be happening. And I think there's kind of local food production and vertical farming and not shipping your produce from somewhere else in the world will play an important role, and I hope it plays the biggest role it can in that transformation. But the fact is that global meat consumption is currently growing, and we just don't have enough land. And as Africa, the demand is growing there. China actually just told
they're buying land elsewhere. Yeah,
but they told their people to limit.
Even with these trends, and we know research is proving again and again, they just found some links to Alzheimer and diet, and everybody knows that to grow your own cells, you need all these items that come from real food, and they're connections. But why do people kill themselves with food? We still have diabetes on the rise, that's self-inflicted.
I think there's many trends happening with rise of chronic disease or diabetes or cardiovascular disease. There's 2 things happening in parallel. People are living longer. The longevity of humans has increased every century, every decade.
But why do people eat shit?
Well, there is an abundance of it.
Why do they keep on doing that? It's where is the explanation for it? Is it because it's cheaper? Is our society functioning in a way that it's so available, or what is?
For thousands of years, we did not have, we never had the privilege of having long-lasting abundance of food. So only and especially when it comes to sugar, we're designed to, whenever we see sugary food, to eat it, because usually they were perishable, a fig here or a strawberry here, and you knew you have to eat it as quickly as you can because there might not be another sugary item on your way. This is not the case in the 20th century. So definitely in commercial interest and branding and sort of, kind of productization of food plays a huge role in even how we perceive food and how it creates addiction patterns, because often it's designed to create addiction patterns. So I, for example, for that reason, I understand a lot of skepticism about novel foods, because Europe for kind of, and especially kind of in the, it's a whole different topic about how European agriculture evolved, but essentially there was a lot of novelty foods, especially in the States, like Wonder Bread and sodas and all that sort of stuff that progress brought us, when it appeared, it wasn't good for us. So but I think we're in a new time where people are trying to redesign the new food with actually taking health and environmental considerations, kind of putting them into the equation.
So what about another topic that's to do with the mental image of food? GMOs, very controversial. What do you think about GMOs, and where do you see the negatives and the positives?
So I think talking about GMOs, real foods, natural foods, there is a lot of information that consumers don't have. And I think that's also changing. With the democratization of food, they're also learning where the food's coming from, what it actually means. And if you take meat, for example, the amount of genetic manipulation that happens before the meat gets to the table is incredibly high. Like the animals, for example, chickens, they grow 6 to 7 times faster than they normally would if they're not being fed what they're fed. If you take turkeys, they get so heavy, top heavy, they can't even stand on their legs. So they're intensely genetically manipulated, and that is something that consumers are not aware of. And on parallel, on the medical side, I can talk about tremendous amount of progress being made to let people live longer, knock out diseases that nobody could cure before, and those are happening through genetic engineering. So I think there's going to be a mix of these things coming forward. Yeah. And as a company, we're in a really good position where we say we don't have to do any genetically modification of the cells, like putting a potato gene into a salmon or something. But what we're going to do is to watch and see the field carefully. If it's evolving where in medicine you can start making people live longer, cure diseases, I wouldn't see why that should not come into food. So we have to be open to saying, can we make meat that causes less inflammation, that also has beneficial fats in there, and also has all the amino acid profiles that are, what are good for people, right? So we are maintaining an open position on that, but not for GMO. It's called genetic engineering at this point.
Okay. What about people have a strong idea of GMOs being Monsanto and bad and killing everybody else, and GMOs being bad for the organisms. But it looks like we're gonna have to do something about food and make better food.
Yeah, I think the big problem there is that kind of the Monsanto type GMOs conflated with a lack of biodiversity, and we absolutely need biodiversity for a bunch of reasons, but there is an argument to be made that there's a lot of people on that planet, and by removing some genetically modified crops right now, we wouldn't be able to feed them. So there's an ethical kind of judgment call, whether we know how to go back to, and whether,
one of the most famous cases of this was when Greenpeace actually campaigned so successfully against GMO that people starved because they didn't receive the food that they were supposed to get from as food aid, because they were not allowed to eat them, banned by their own government.
And there's, then the climate change is happening. I mean, there are, depending on the trajectory it takes, we'll see what happens, but different crops might not be able to evolve in time on their kind of naturally evolutionary trajectory. And I think also, when you think of everybody who has diabetes, most people take kind of synthetically made insulin. It's made with kind of, I believe it's made with genetically engineered.
It's recombinant.
Yeah, it's a recombinant product. So it's not, I think, theoretically it's not genetically modified itself, but it comes from a genetic engineered organism that kind of produces it in the process of fermentation. And that's a very exciting area of synthetic biology, where you actually don't have to, you don't eat the genetic modified part, you just eat sort of yeast and different algae can be used as kind of little machines to produce the things we want them to produce, which are just the same. And I don't think people would argue that that's needed.
What is the price point viable already? Say you want to feature some certain features in your crop, that it's good against dry periods, or that it grows faster, or contains certain elements to it. what is the price point of engineering that kind of crops already? Are there labs in the world that can afford it, or is it only huge corporations, or what are we talking? Which scale would you say, ballpark?
I mean, it's definitely done already. I'm actually not. I wouldn't be able to say off the top of my head what's the price point, like considering like.
Let's say how much. Yeah.
It's that research is done, and I think it's happening. All of that. A lot of it depends on what is the regulatory situation and what if we actually understand how to do things responsibly, which I actually, yeah.
So what other what else is getting you positive about food tech or food advancements? Like, are there some ways of agriculture that are really exciting, or what's your look into the future?
Well, the most exciting thing is almost all the innovation that's happening in food tech has sustainability in mind. So preservation of resources, land, water, greenhouse gas emissions, and also nutrition in mind. So almost all the foods that are being innovated now or designed now, or going back to the things we loved before, are all made with health in mind and nutrition in mind. So I think, people took food for granted, never questioned where it came from. The fact that we're questioning it is forcing us to innovate to make it better for us and also the planet. So I think I can't see any food company surviving saying that we're going to make food that's going to destroy the community around you. And all these big companies are struggling in how to connect with the new consumer. So, for example, social media is such an important thing now. Communicating well was probably what Monsanto did not do at all. They never communicated with the customer. They wanted somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
But companies like ours have to really start engaging very early and start talking to people about the food they're eating and what they should expect to eat, which is why it's an incredibly exciting time to innovate in the food tech right now.
What about, I had the chance to visit Caleb's lab in MIT Media Lab. They had about a shipping container size food computer.
Right. Yeah.
So do you see that food production is going to be distributed as well to people, or maybe even office buildings, or where do you see that going?
I mean, it's definitely going to happen. I think just a few months ago, actually Elon Musk's brother, Kimball Musk, he launched...
He has a brother?
He has a brother, yeah. So he launched a company called Square Roots, or announced that is launching, and he wants to, in his own words, I believe it was, empower 1,000 vertical farming entrepreneurs. So they're using some sort of preset modular container system with robotic, with sensors and hardware already made for that. But they essentially want to scale what Caleb and his team started doing at MIT. To test, what is the optimal level of hydration? What is the optimal nutritional profile for soil? For different types of produce. So I actually don't know if we're going to have stuff growing like that probably we will. But already supermarkets are starting to implement their own little sections where they grow the herbs. Because actually, there's a lot of food waste coming from there, and you benefit from growing there locally. So it already is economically viable. So probably there's no reason why that trend shouldn't continue.
Yeah. What do you see food production going towards? Is it going to be simplified for people, or is it? I
think it depends on where you live. So if you're living close to a very urban area, I think it's going to be distributed from very large facilities that are closer, because if we can think about a meat plant like the one we envision, it could be very close to a city. It doesn't have to be far away where all the contaminants or the pollution that comes from an intense animal farm makes them be very far away, but we could be very close to the cities, and they don't have to be massive enterprises, but much more localized, and they could be right next to where people live. So we feel like it really opens up the options, cuts down on transportation, makes things local, lots of flavors emerging. I mean, for example, you can grow the types of meat flavors that are typically only found in different parts of the world with different environments, but mimicking the environment in the production unit.
Yeah,
it sounds it sounds a little bit like sci-fi, but actually the government of like the Netherlands and I know Israel, they're really supporting that type of the kind of culture, the entire clean meat ecosystem, because they don't have much land. They know their sort of food safety depends on diversifying among protein sources. So I think some countries will be leaders there, and also legislative leaders, and will also help bring us better systems.
I would love to talk to you all evening about this. Let's continue backstage. Thank you so much for being here. I think we're all getting hungry talking so much about food.
Well,
thank you so much. And pleasure to have you at Slush. And try some pulled oats. You had pulled oats last night.
Yeah. It was
I'm going to go and try it now.
Really great product.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.